Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for joining us. We're excited that you're here, kicking off at 10:30. I've got a fantastic group of panelists this morning, so I'm happy to get started, and we'll have a few more folks join us as they wrap up their coffee break. So welcome. My name is Jacqueline Keena. I'm from EMILI in Manitoba. Our work there is to accelerate the digital agriculture ecosystem, and I'm excited to welcome you to From Bytes to Bytes, Rebooting the Agri-Food Sector. And I would say that we're going to talk about lots of interesting technology developments in agriculture and across the agri-food industry. And I think for us and our panel, we might even say that it's really about sort of booting or kicking into a new era of ag and ag-food technology. So we're excited to talk to you a little bit more about that this morning. Before I introduce my fellow panelists and our great group for our discussion this morning, I just want to share a little bit more about myself and EMILI. As I mentioned, we work to accelerate the digital ag ecosystem. And for us, that means really working in key areas to accelerate different components of the industry to increase the rate of adoption and success of full integration of new technologies. And it's important to us that people and businesses, including farms, have the tools and skills that they need to be able to seize the opportunities that new technologies present, and to do so in an increasingly sustainable and productive way. I think our collective challenge is to produce more with less and be able to do so sustainably over the long term. I'm excited to be able to share more with this audience in the course of our conversation about one of our cornerstone projects, Innovation Farms, powered by Ag Expert, that exemplifies each area of our work, where we are testing, validating, demonstrating new technologies on a full-scale commercial farm in Manitoba. At Innovation Farms, we are part of risk mitigating the adoption of new technologies by being an early adopter, trying them at scale and sharing with the ag industry, with farmers, and with the general public about how it goes, and being a first trialer of these new technologies in a real-world farming environment. I'm very pleased to be able to collaborate with other smart farms across Canada, including through the Pan-Canadian Smart Farm Network, and I'm happy to welcome one of my fellow panelists, Dr. Joy Agnew from Olds College, who leads that network activity. And as we get started this morning, we've heard of the power and potential of new technologies to dramatically alter the ways in which we produce, process, and sell our food. So we have a fantastic group of panelists this morning, bringing unique perspectives from across the value chain. And I will ask each of our panelists this morning to please introduce yourself and share about how you use digital technologies in your work in the agri-food industry. And I will throw it to Joy first.
Thanks, Jacqueline. Good morning, everybody. I am Joy Agnew. I'm the VP of Research at Olds College of Agriculture and Technology. So I oversee the Applied Research Division that is focused on accelerating the development and adoption of best practices enabled by technologies and digital tools for crop production and livestock production. I also oversee our smart farm operations, which is obviously a critical asset for our research program, as well as our academic programming and knowledge sharing for producers and other industry stakeholders. So we're using digital tools and data across everything that we do at Olds College, including on our farm and our farm operations, to track and monitor and help make decisions. We're using data in the classroom to expose students to the latest and emerging tools related to technologies and use of data for decision making and other purposes. And obviously within the research program as well, we're using a lot of leading edge data and not even commercialized tools for collecting, managing, and turning data into insights to improve the overall productivity and sustainability of food production.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Joy. Maybe Godard, I'd ask you to go next. I will try and put the intros together in a way that builds on each other.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Godard. I only have one name, so doctor is not my first name. They need two names to get an online form going, so that's why that is. I am the Chief Operating Officer and co-founder of Verge. What we do is we develop software that helps farmers plan, simulate, and validate the movement of equipment in the field and help them execute those field operations as efficiently as possible. So it's a route planning software, and our massive transformative purpose as a company is to help the agriculture sector with that transition to autonomous farming.
Awesome, thank you. And maybe Jonathan, to offer us a perspective from the US.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Jonathan McFadden. I'm a research economist with the U.S. Department of Agriculture in a fairly small shop that they have there called the Economic Research Service. My job is essentially being the main researcher on precision agriculture and digital agriculture, at our small agency. So I analyze things related to farmers' use and adoption of these technologies, as well as their impacts on things like farm productivity, field-level productivity, environmental resilience, risk management, and so on.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thanks for being here. And Dana, last but not least, and an important next piece of the value chain. Tell us a little bit about your work.
Yeah, thank you so much. I am very other on this panel. Not only do I not have a G or J name, I'm also further down the value chain in the actual food sector. So the Canadian Food Innovation Network is the organization that I run. We're member-based, industry insight-led. We have about 5,000 members. Most of them are working a little bit further down the value chain than is relevant to this panel, but we do have some real superstars who are bridging the gap between ag and the commercial food sector. And I'm excited to talk about what we've learned from those particular projects that we've funded to help bring new technologies to the Canadian agri-food business portfolio.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, thanks to each of you for being here. I think that this morning we're going to cover a variety of topics related to digital technologies in agriculture and food, and it's going to be a good discussion. So I want to start where it all starts, at the farm gate. And so my first question is for Joy. And could you please tell us a little bit about how are Canadian farmers currently using digital tools and data on their farms? And tell us a little bit more from the perspective of what are those front runners, most innovative examples doing versus maybe what is more the average right now?
I would say, and this is all based on sort of anecdotal observations and discussions that I've had with producers over the last couple of decades, I guess. So it's not formal survey information, but from what I've seen and learned, every farm is using data a little bit differently, right? And I would say almost every farm is using data in some form, whether it's from the financial data management to just looking at the yield data that comes directly off of pretty much every single piece of equipment that harvests now will generate yield maps, and even digital tools like GPS and auto steering. Those are all very well understood and have high adoption rates. So almost every farm is doing some component of that. But then I would say the top performing or the top 5% farms, I think their real value proposition or difference in how they're managing data is that they aren't getting overwhelmed with the big data. They understand and they can focus on the pieces of data that are most critical and useful for them, and they are measuring it, monitoring it, and analyzing it consistently, and then using that to make various decisions or just helping to tell their story. So I wouldn't say that the top performing farms are doing anything massively different other than they know what they're focusing on, and they have a strong understanding of what they're doing, how it impacts their return on investment. And most of them are actually even measuring and have an idea of what that return on investment is, so that they know that what they're doing is a positive thing, and they're more willing to maybe look at other new ideas and be innovative and look at adopting new technologies and practices.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you. I think you hit on something very important that we'll talk about through our conversation, which is that opportunity to demonstrate ROI, see it firsthand perhaps at a smart farm site across Canada, but also then for them to experience it on their own farm through that use of data and really proving out that the return that was promised to them in sort of the sales pitch is actually being realized in their actual activities. Thank you. Jonathan, tell us a little bit about the U.S. Perspective on digital agriculture in relation to more established concepts like precision agriculture. And what does the current sort of use of these technologies look like? How pervasive is it, and how are they impacting farming?
Yeah, sure thing. So all great questions, and it's a nice way to complement what Joy was just talking about. So a lot of the U.S. use of precision and digital agriculture is quite similar to Canada's use. You know, we have a lot of combined markets across North America for a lot of the types of software and pieces of equipment that we use. But just going back to the first question about precision agriculture versus digital agriculture, sort of on the farther end of the spectrum with more complex and increasingly sophisticated technologies. Part parts of digital ag in the US that we might be thinking about would be things like gene editing or blockchain, if you will, all the way up to things like fully autonomous farming. You know, John Deere just introduced its fully autonomous tractor for North American markets here last year, which of course is a big thing. You know, U.S. use of these types of technologies really varies within the country, and it really varies based on technologies. So first generation things like yield maps and yield monitors and soil maps are taken up at fairly high rates. Things like variable rate technologies are sort of in the middle, and then you have things like automated guidance, automated steering, which have really had a remarkable increase in growth over the past 20 years. So in the US, for technologies like automated steering, about 5 to 10% of crop planted acres, relied on that type of technology. But 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, over half of planted acres in the U.S. for a lot of major field crops like corn and soybeans, wheat, cotton, rice, and others. Over half of those planted acres were managed using guidance, and the number seems to be increasing every time we survey it. On the other side of things, though, I would say drone use remains quite limited in the United States, and I know the numbers from the 2021 Census of Agriculture here in Canada sort of show basically the same thing, and so there can be kind of a mismatch between press coverage and hype around drone use relative to what it actually is in the field, and so I think that'll be interesting to see how that kind of shapes up in the future.
Can I ask a follow-up there? You mentioned drones and sort of hype in the media versus what's really happening or not. How much of that would you contribute to that ROI discussion of people needing to see it provide value? Is that one of the main barriers, or are there other barriers before that one that are still impeding adoption?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. There are a lot of different factors. I think the ROI thing is I'm an economist, so for me that's probably the biggest factor in my opinion. But there are a lot of other factors relate to, again, adoption and barriers. So things like training, for example, just actually knowing how to use the technology and how to make appropriate use of it for your own operation is really huge. We can talk about enabling policy as well, things that can really help to usher in, increased adoption or lack thereof, for situations in which we don't really have those types of enabling policies. Other things like farm size and farm scale, education, other risk management type policies. It really runs the gamut, I'd say.
Interesting. Thank you. Please.
Sidebar, I used to work at the University of Guelph, very close to agriculture, and one of the things I learned about the limitations on drone use in Canada is that our regulatory says that your drone cannot be out of your vision line, and needless to say, that's the benefit of the drone. So I think there's an issue there. Joey probably knows a lot more about that than I do, but I just thought I'd offer that.
Yeah, I know, absolutely. Joy, I know we're diverting a little bit, but I certainly do want to provide opportunity for you to make a comment if you want there.
Yeah, the regulatory hurdles, I guess, are one of the barriers, and lack of understanding of ROI or lack of awareness of ROI, lack of training opportunities. Those are all very well-known barriers. But I would add another one that's been discussed, but it really hit home for me this morning listening to the keynote, and that's the culture of farming, especially the primary production being in the field, touching and feeling, because a lot of digital tools and technologies are sort of promoting the really cool, sexy ability to do everything remotely, right? Hey, you can install these weather stations and soil health monitors and leaf wetness indices and get some satellite imagery, and you don't even have to be in the field, and you can make decisions about whether or not your disease risk is high enough to spray or not. Cool, hey? Guess what? Farmers aren't ready for that yet. That the culture is still, who they are is still in the field, checking their crops. And the gold standard right now for deciding whether or not to spray for fungicide is you're walking in the field around noon, and if your boots get wet, that means the moisture and the biomass conditions are conducive to disease presence, so you spray. So that culture differentiation, I think, and that who farmers are is another, I wouldn't say barrier, but it's something that the industry needs to address in order to improve adoption. And I think it's an important one.
Oh, that's great. Thank you for that. Last year when we were out doing tours at Innovation Farm, I heard a really good sort of just quip that has stuck with me, that from the moment farmers seed, it's about protecting that investment and maximizing yield. And so things like demonstrating ROI to make sure that, of course, return on investment, but also that it actually works and delivers is all the more important, because they're going to defer to the thing that they know to protect that investment. So interesting to hear that, you know, the best way to indicate needing to spray is still the muddy boots test. Godard, I want to pivot a little bit to sort of futuristic thinking of things to come in farming and ask you about how do precision ag and digital solutions contribute to the future of autonomous farming and some of the things that you're working on?
Yep. I think when everyone hears autonomous farming, you tend to imagine self-driving tractors first, because that's how we've thought about autonomy and autonomous cars. I think, as Joy mentioned, the self-driving capability is probably just a small element of autonomy in farming. It's important, the machine needs to be able to drive itself, but there are a lot of decisions that are being made in the field by the farmer, as either they're walking through or while they're in the machine noticing something on the field. So how do you enable the grower to continue to make decisions like they've always used to, but without actually being in the field? Which requires, a digital characterization to an extent where you can be at the comfort of your home or office and monitor and perform operations remotely, just like how you would in the field. So how do you enable that is something that we think a lot about, which is creating the digital twin of that farm. For lack of a better word, I think digital twin has been used quite a lot. To what extent that means in farming would be physical attributes of the field. So this is the boundary, the height and depth information, topography, fence lines, obstacles. You need to have that pretty accurately mapped. And if you were to ask me how further along we are on that autonomy chain, I don't think even we can confidently say that 30 to 40% of the farms in the world actually have an RTK mapped boundary. So if you ask me, boundary is by far the most important element to start with precision agriculture or digital agriculture, but we haven't prioritized the need for an RTK boundary yet. And that will be absolutely necessary for an autonomous machine to pull into the field and even pick its ideal starting point. Characterizing the field from a physical attributes perspective, there are going to be temporal attributes like things that change, weather, soil, soil moisture. These are aspects that change continuously over a season. And then the third aspect that's important to us is characterizing that equipment itself. There's a variety of equipment that enters the field over a growing season, whether that is for soil preparation, for seeding, for crop protection or harvesting. All of these machines need to be characterized to an extent so that you can simulate what is the operation and route that the machine needs to perform. Because at the end of the day, whatever the machine does is the value that is received at the end of the season in terms of yield. And then the most overlooked aspect and the final piece of this digital twin are farmer decisions. I think any farmer you speak to, they're very proud to, and rightly so, to point out that this has been generational. They've learned a lot from their grandfather, their father, and that's what they're doing right now. Are those decisions digitally captured today? And if we don't do that, I think it won't help the leap to autonomy.
Oh, excellent, thank you. It's interesting that you mentioned some of that generational knowledge transfer and how people are learning about best practice on their own land over the course of time. Some of the sensors that we have out at Innovation Farms, similar to the ones out at Olds, they're spinning off recommendations. Hey, be alert, you have increasing disease or pest pressure, you should consider an action here. And our experience out at Innovation Farms is that those triggers are known to the farmer in advance of or at the same time that the model is spinning off the same recommendation. But this is a person who's been out there for 3 or 4 generations and is very familiar. And so as we keep talking about other challenges in the agri-food industry and talent gap, and we think about bringing new people onto farm to do key jobs, I think that's really where some of that can support, where we're talking about a person who this may be their first season out at the farm, and they don't have that 30-year experience, or perhaps trying new things or new varietals and need that sort of support provided by the technology and the data. Maybe just one quick follow-up is, are there particular regions in Canada that are best suited, or sort of your initial targets to create these digital twins? Is anything easier or better suited from sort of what things look like in Canada?
We focus primarily on Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba, where there's broadacre solid seeded crops. I think there is an initiative around Canada where there is high resolution, even to certain parts, topography data available. That could be a starting point to creating at least the topography layer of the digital twin. Of course, farmers can map things themselves using drones and other ideas that our co-panelists have mentioned. But as a software company, you want to reduce the barrier for a farmer or a user to enter and sign up for your software and not having to provide you data to begin with. You want a solution where they log in and we have, I'm not trying to promote my product, but it is a feature that I have to use. And as an example is you log into a software like ours, which provides route planning. You want to zoom into a map layer and say, that's my field, and that's my field. And it's our job to give them the most accurate boundary and not their job to input that boundary. Right? So are there publicly available or commercially available data sets that we can leverage to accurately map that two-dimensional boundary and a three-dimensional topography, which would be an ideal starting point for these growers?
Okay, great. Thanks for that. I'm just interested in some of the sort of baby steps that people can take to be able to put themselves in that ideal situation to uptake the technology. Okay, switching gears a little bit to think about food. Dana, tell us a little bit about the state of Canadian food innovation, and I'm particularly interested in anything you want to raise to us, but also in taking homegrown ingredients like commodities that we're talking about on farm and turning them into goods.
Yeah, Canadians love to support local, and their definition of local is quite elastic. They obviously think about, what's grown in my neighborhood. I, for instance, live in potato country, but then they, anything with the Canadian flag on it is usually preferred by a Canadian consumer, which is great news. And there's a lot of really, sort of interesting stats around that. For instance, it might surprise you to know that about 70% of the food in your pantry, your refrigerator, is actually produced and made in Canada. We often think that there's a lot of imports, and seasonally, of course, that number fluctuates, but we really do produce about 70% of the food that Canadians eat. And it's really important for people working in food innovation to understand what consumers care about when it comes to those local or imported goods. And we've had a few projects where we've had people tackle how to help either the end seller or the end user to have the most information to plan either their business or to give them assurance about what they're buying. So there's a lot of really interesting work going on that requires a lot of knowledge transfer between both ends of the value chain, so that the right data is anticipated at the farm level, I would say. So an example is we work with a company, we funded 2 of their projects now, the first company that we have supported more than once, called Index Biosystems. And they do something really fascinating to me. They create a novel yeast, and then they kill it and they extract its DNA, which sounds a bit brutal, but it's yeast. And then they can, right at the seeding level, put that inert yeast into planting. So for instance, they've done a project with wheat, and they were able to have that yeast impregnated, being completely having no effect whatsoever on the crop, into the at the seeding stage, and right up to basically your toaster, if you were to take a piece of that bread and send it to have it traced, you could go right back probably to the row, but absolutely to the farm and the field. Amazing traceability capability, which starts with farmers adopting the technology, ends with, and if you think about berries and lettuce and all the horrible recalls that, you know, for one farm out of Salinas, California, having one bad harvest of romaine lettuce that cleared the whole grocery store of lettuce. The economic impact of those kinds of recalls, huge. So we're pretty excited about technologies like that, which are based in food science and have an impact and benefit for everyone along the value chain.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. So you're mentioning traceability and that ability to trace all the way back potentially to the row related to food safety and that piece about how Canadians are interested to buy Canadian products. What do you think the future is related to traceability for people to want to understand that Canadian products exist in their ultimate end product and some of the, I'm thinking about some of the sustainability practices that consumers are starting to demand of those commodities. Is that in our future as well?
I don't think it's in our future. I think it's here. I think it's present now, particularly with younger generations. When we analyze, Gen Z, who are in their 20s, and the newer cohort that's following the Gen Alphas, they're very they're digital natives. They're used to having lots of information at their fingertips, and they've grown up with climate crisis being something that they've heard about almost every day of their lives, unfortunately. So they're very focused on sustainability. Are they willing to pay more for it? Probably not. I think they actually expect it just is built in.
Okay, thank you for that. I think we're all keen to hear a little bit more about innovation and specifically the promise of automation and how that can support a more productive and efficient industry in general. At every level in Canadian agri-food, we are experiencing significant talent shortages. I've got some numbers from 2022 from CARC that put the combined labor gap between 100 and 150,000 positions left unfilled here in Canada, costing the industry $3.5 billion or just shy of 10% in lost revenue in 2022 alone. So, and these numbers we know are unfortunately continuing to trend upward. And so Godard, my question for you is really around what are some of the remaining barriers to us getting there? We've talked about a few, but what are some of the ways that we can continue to put the right tools and policies in place to continue that journey? And what factors do you believe are contributing to some of this hesitation or resistance?
I think when you look at, for any vertical, what does digital transformation actually mean? And then you look at a workplace, I think there's a set of categories where you can assign products to. There's a new category called team collaboration, and Slack and Zoom and things like that fall into that category. There's the Office suite of products that tell you more about how you use Word and PowerPoint to increase your productivity and communicate. You look at agriculture, and there aren't established categories. There are categories for buying seed, chem fertilizer, and selling crop and machines, but for software, it's all general, right? Like if I were to pitch my solution as a route planning software, I immediately get combined with any farm management software because route planning is not an established product category, right? So I think my advice to anyone building software in ag is make sure you know your category. If not, try really, really hard to establish that category and be that category creator, because positioning your product and the category is key. And I think that I find is the first barrier. The second is kind of tied to labor, but it really is an opportunity. If I were to view how a machine is being operated in a farm, in Canada, typically you pull your seeder in and you're outlining the perimeter of that field. That is a highly skilled operation for an operator sitting in that, quarter, if not $500,000 tractor pulling an 86-foot wide implement behind them. And that's manually driven, right? So growers are looking for skilled labor at that instance, and they can't find that skilled labor. The inner tracks are easy because there's GPS and auto steer, the machine just drives itself. So what we can do is, can we prescribe that, outer perimeter pass that is not straight as a route that an operator just select, and the machine is now using its auto steer to steer the curves around the field. That would give the grower different options to go pursue labor that is probably not needed to be that highly skilled, right? So I think there's an aspect of labor and how that labor is being used in the farm. The third is, I think there's just a lot of software available for a grower, and it's hard to sign in and sign out of so many software. I mean, we work in a company, you don't want to be signing out of Google, signing into. Everyone has the Teams and Zooms issue, right? I mean, imagine a farm where there's, you're monitoring irrigation, you're monitoring soil moisture in a different app, you're outplanting in a different app. I think either an OEM or another digital player need to integrate these solutions. Don't need to necessarily own all the solutions, but be an integrator. That would make farmers' lives much more easier as a user. I think that's another barrier.
That's great.
Can I make a comment?
Please.
Yeah, so on that chart data that you shared, I've actually been, for the last several years, co-chair of their subcommittee on automation and technology, together with farmer Andrew Campbell, who a lot of you will know, Fresh Air Farm. He's a really super smart guy, and I've learned a lot from him and other people on that subcommittee. And a lot of that insight has gone into the learning that's led to the development of CFIN's Yodel Career Hub. But most interestingly, I love, I mentioned knowledge transfer in my last answer, and I love the way what's happening in various elements of the value chain can be transferred. And another company that CFIN's working with, a Quebec company called DeepSight, is going to offer, I think in the future, farmers a really interesting opportunity to not only access softwares that are, universally useful for various kinds of farms, but to really capture generational and institutional knowledge. What DeepSight does is they've started in food manufacturing, and it's an ocular device that they'll put on someone. We joke, we call them Jean-Guy, because in Quebec, if you've ever worked in Quebec food manufacturing, there's always at least 5 or 6 Jean-Guys on the shop floor. And so Jean-Guy's getting ready to retire. As we know, many farmers are aging out. So this will work for them. And they wear this ocular device, and it records their day-to-day. And it captures all those things that aren't in SOPs. And maybe it's the boots. You're like, oh, my boots are this wet. This means I need to do this kind of knowledge. And then the system will create a way to communicate that information in both written as well as oral and video formats, and it'll translate it into any language. So if you're bringing in farm workers from other countries and seasonal programs that exist in Canada and other parts of the world, there's going to be an amazing way to preserve the way you run your farm. And I think that's really super cool.
Oh, very. I'm being developed right here in Canada. That's fantastic. So we're talking a little bit about knowledge translation and sharing of new innovations and findings, and that being an important part of continuing to press for integration and full adoption of new technologies. So Joy, I'm just hoping that you can tell us a little bit about what you think the role of research entities like smart farms are in that ongoing evolution of digital ag. How can they support the increased adoption of and full integration of these technologies?
Well, you described it pretty well, Jacqueline, actually, in your description of the EMILI Innovation Farm, right? It's being the early adopter, taking the risk so farmers don't have to, and then sharing that information about how it works in that region, in that production system, and how it could work for them, right? And then providing them with the access to expertise and potentially even troubleshooting to actually adopt it for their own farm, which is so incredibly important. So it really comes down to smart farms are able to validate, demonstrate, and then educate to help farmers get over that adoption hurdle, I guess, and help them understand what the potential ROI could be for their specific farm, because every farm is different. We won't be able to apply the same kind of metric or, hey, this technology will work for every farm that does this, right? Because it really depends on their systems, their tractors even, or the way that they do things on their farm. It's very, very specific to every farm. So the value of the smart farms is the ability to provide that information in an unbiased and independent way so that every farmer can see how it might work for them.
Fantastic. Can you tell us just a little bit about your perspective of, as you're trying and validating new technologies out at Olds, what are you seeing in terms of sometimes technologies being effective, but not maybe at the right scale or the right price point? And sort of what do you do in that instance?
We try to quantify that, I guess, and measure that, and then identify use cases, I guess, because yeah, that comes up all the time. And even in the example that I gave before about the decision to spray fungicide or not, right? It's, do you need every single piece that I mentioned, where it's a weather station and satellite imagery and the leaf wetness sensor, or do you just need one of those pieces to make a reasonably good decision, right? Because digital tools will give us the technical capability to be super accurate. But how accurate does your intel have to be to make the right decision to improve overall productivity, sustainability, and your ROI? That is where there's still a lot of uncertainty, and we don't really know yet. Because I can guarantee you, if you pull all those things together, the spore detectors, the weather stations, the satellite imagery, I can guarantee you that you will improve your probability of spraying when you should and not spraying when you shouldn't. But how does that translate to actual dollars and improve productivity? We don't know that yet.
Yeah, thanks for that. It's something that I think we're all sort of working and grappling with, because bringing out a great new technology that works but is perhaps far too expensive or not really able to be scaled at this time, it does something to the hype cycle to be able to demonstrate it, and we show it to people and like, look how incredible it is. And then they say, great, where can I buy it? And I'm like, well, this is the only one they've ever made, and actually it's way too expensive. And so being able to get to a place where we're talking about some of those calculations and say, it's on a journey, the technology's gonna scale, it's gonna become the right expense to provide that value. I think that's another nuance to the kind of conversation that has to happen at smart farms demonstrating the technology. So thank you for that. Jonathan, maybe you can offer us a little bit of your perspective on what does effective knowledge translation involve in the context of integrating and adopting emerging technologies?
Yeah, great question, and a really tough one as well. I'll just say, and that I fully agree in many respects with what Joy was just saying in the previous question. And I think when we're talking about emerging technologies, since many of them are prototypes, it makes it so much more challenging to sort of figure out how we engage with our audience and how do we sort of talk about them in a way that doesn't oversell the product, but also doesn't undersell it. So if there's potential there, the idea is to try to get out the message, but also provide caveats, when needed. And so, I think the best answer to this was probably given in this morning's keynote address. I feel like you get Marcus Collins here to talk about, empathy and cultural framing and then things like that. But I would say, one of the most important factors would just be clarity, just being very clear about, this is the prototype, or this is the emerging technology we're talking about. This is what it does. Here's a list of the potentials, but here are some lists of the drawbacks, including things related to economic factors. And in some cases, that's really, really tough. So just to give an example, I've been working on some research related to cellular agriculture now for the past 1 or 2 years, and we don't even really agree if that's what we should call it. Should we call it cellular agriculture? So should we call it cell cultivated, or many of the other types of terminologies that we have for it? So even when you're starting from that, what should we call it type of conversation, it makes things that much more difficult. But I think again, clarity and knowing your audience would be the most important things, at least from my position.
Oh, excellent, thank you. Dana, I'm hoping you can share a little bit with us about how you're seeing the use of AI and specifically machine learning change the product development cycle for food processors and manufacturers, and how does that end up benefiting Canadian consumers?
Well, the benefit is that it really accelerates the product development cycle. Yourself, if you grab your ruler and your clipboard and your temperature probe and you start taking notes, that it takes time. You've got to, handle a lot of things, including those tools and whatever it is you're measuring. And that's traditionally what has happened in food manufacturing, is that you make a batch, you take it to the QA lab, and you take all of these metrics. With the invention of sensors and applying AI, and specifically the subset of AI, machine learning tools, to that cycle, you take out a lot of the time, you take out a lot of the transposition and qualitative types of judgment calls that go into that type of note taking, and you go from being able to test a number of batches per day to sometimes it being minutes. So we're seeing at the food processing end of things that product development cycles are vastly accelerated. Of course, in agriculture, you have to depend on the seasons, the growing cycle. You can't make corn grow faster. So there's a disconnect sometimes between the understanding of people working in food technology development and if they want to shift into ag tech, they sometimes have to really get their heads around it. But an example of something that bridges the two, CFIN has funded a project with a company called Vivid Machines, who's been working with pack houses and Loblaws, and quite a famous apple growing company called Chudley's in Ontario. And what they do is they have kind of taken the best of the drone concept and paired that with ocular technologies and sensors, and they can now much more accurately predict, right, like this time of year, how many apples of which variety and of what size that they anticipate based on the number of blossoms, the shape of the blossoms, etc. Apples will come to market in October, and this is an amazingly interesting tool because it gives farmers amazing data. It helps them to make some of those choices Joy was talking about along the way, like how many branches to prune, etc., when to apply particular chemicals. But it also means that consumers get products more quickly, because if the right number of the right size of the right variety of apple hit the pack house, a manufacturer can say, great, I can make 10,000 pies this month. But if fewer arrive, then demand is out of whack. So there's some really interesting things happening that are using machine learning in ways that, I don't think, just that are cookie cutter. There's smart people with really creative problem solving skills are using these tools to not just accelerate the product development cycle, but also to help the people who want to develop products have the right tools at their fingertips.
Oh, that's fantastic. Like to hear that it's accelerating the speed of iteration and incrementality there. That's fantastic.
And improving communication, right? Like that's the thing. If you have to print a flyer 6 weeks before, the consumer will get it in their newspaper, you need to know what you're going to have to sell.
Totally. Joy, we talked about trialing technologies on farm there and some of the limitations around the seasons. Do you have any comment on that? Are technologies unlocking any additional potential there to try and demonstrate new technologies?
Well, no matter how far advanced digital technologies get, we're still going to get one growing season in Canada. So, and that's always the challenge with on-farm evaluation. We get one full growing season to test and validate, and then share that information and try to use that again to accelerate the adoption of best practices, which is a huge challenge. Partly because we honestly in Canada don't have a really good understanding of what our current adoption rates are. I know Jonathan mentioned, Census 2021 ag data, which is great, but that's historical. If we're trying to measure and monitor the impact of entities like smart farms or new incentives or new policies on the impact on adoption of technology, we don't have a good way to actually monitor that in real time. So honestly, it's a bit of a call to action, I think, for the Canadian sector to figure that out and get a better assessment of where we're at with current adoption so we can better measure the impact of practice change and things like smart farms and incentives on the actual adoption rate, because we only get one growing season a year. And if we are going to come anywhere close to meeting our sustainability targets and targets for increased productivity to improve food security in, the next 10 or 20 years, we need rapid change, and we need to be able to measure and quantify that change. Because historically, and it's easy to look at historical data, but historically we know that adoption of disruptive practices in ag takes decades to get from 10% adoption up to 80% adoption. Decades. We don't have decades to make the big changes that we need to from a sustainability and productivity standpoint.
Yeah, for sure.
Can I just add, it's not quite just one growing season either. I think Joy hit a nerve for me there because we struggle there. I mean, if you really look at the growing season in Canada, you have a weather event that's just lingering along with snow, warm again snow, and then warms up and you have a week to go plant because you're looking at a weather event after August. So if you don't harvest it, the crop cannot grow faster. It needs its time and water to grow and to optimize yield. So when you talk about adoption, even if the growers bought a software that's either solving a precision ag problem or a digital ag problem, I'm not really sure if they've actually used it because the window comes, they're going to just go plant. They have to, right? So yes, it's one growing season, but it's worse than that.
Yeah, good point. We're thinking about that in Manitoba, and I'm sure here as well, as it will not quit raining. And so it's really holding out the seeding a little bit. Jonathan, we talked a little bit about economic issues and needing to demonstrate ROI. Wondering if you can comment a little bit about what are some of the main economic issues surrounding farmers' use of digital ag technologies and what's working and what's not working in terms of some of that government data collection.
Yeah, both great questions. So I might just harken back to what Joy was talking about here a few minutes ago in terms of just quantifying, the economic effects of these technologies to farmers. And I think Joy said it really well. There's just a huge amount of heterogeneity, from farm to farm, and even within, field to field on any farm's operation, and even within, one's own field. And so trying to actually measure those benefits is really challenging. So we did some research in my company or my organization a few years back, just trying to sort of get at, the economic effects of just farm data itself, as contained in things like soil maps and yield maps. And so we found that it tended to boost farmers, productivity by way of efficiency, so squeezing out sort of more bushels of corn, for example, per unit of input, rather than focusing on things like profitability. There can be kind of a mismatch between technologies, or the use of some technologies to boost profitability, relative to efficiency. Profitability, as we all know, can vary so much across years. You might have just poor crop prices, and then you're in the red rather than being in the black. Or you might have really high fertilizer costs for various reasons that year, which can sort of send you again into the red rather than the black. So trying to attribute that to a particular technology can be really, really challenging. And so just to echo Joy's sort of a call to action in terms of quantifying these benefits is something that's really needed. Other economic issues relate to things like the labor shortages we were just talking about here as well. And trying to figure out what are the benefits of automation in terms of perhaps being one potential solution to some of these labor shortages. I think we're really just at the beginning of our understanding of how that might work, and really we're at the beginning of our understanding in terms of being able to quantify some of the indirect things. So if we are able to sort of help, move the needle in terms of labor shortages, well, okay, does that free up farmers' time to then go do something else? Get a job in town, for example, or maybe a spouse who gets a job, in town instead of having to manage things around the clock, on the farm. In terms of government's data collection efforts, yes, 2021 seems historical, certainly, and I want to go back to a point that Godard made here a few minutes ago as well, in terms of we don't really know what the adoption rates are for a lot of these technologies in the United States, in Canada, and in a lot of other countries around the world. There might be around a dozen or so countries worldwide where we have really good data collected at large scales from really good survey designs. And so I think in general, what's not working well is just the lack of data that we have, the lack of information. And so there have been some major initiatives in the US to collect more of this information. If we start thinking about linkages between precision and digital as they relate to, say, climate change mitigation efforts. And so there's a lot of money right now being dedicated to those types of measures. So to the extent that some of these precision ag practices and technologies can be linked to those climate practices, there might be a little bit more of a way for us to get more meaningful information about adoption rates and impacts, piggybacking on those types of initiatives. But it's really just so highly variable. So I think what isn't working is essentially the fact that we don't have data. And that comes with things related to data protection, data privacy, data security, and I don't know if we want to take the conversation in that direction. Those are huge issues, and data standards as well.
Thank you very much. I actually do know that there is another session about that today, that Todd Jansen session on ag data transparency. So thank you. That's a good segue. If we had another sessions worth of time, yes, that's where we need to go. I want to leave some time for any audience questions. If there are any, my friend here is going to run around with a mic. Oh, I see a friendly face there. Can we actually borrow that from you, Dana? Thank you very much. Here you are.
Please raise your hand.
Adrian has a question. Lovely.
Hi, thank you so much. That was really informative. So we were just talking about data transparency, but I am going to ask a question that will throw another wrench, I think, in the optimism around digital agriculture. So I've been working with EMILI the last couple of years on a series of modules for producers around data literacy. One of the modules is on cybersecurity, on-farm cybersecurity. And the argument is, from the organization that we worked on with this module, is food infrastructure is critical infrastructure for national security. We're seeing more and more large-scale incidences of hacks. How does this play into your discussions? I'd love to hear from the US perspective as well, if those discussions are happening too, around cybersecurity and farm and critical infrastructure.
Thank you. Do you want to offer a comment there?
Great. Yeah, no, great question. I think in general, I don't know all the particulars, but I think in general, the U.S. sort of feels similarly in terms of, the agri-food system being of huge, domestic security interest. And so, how to ward off some of those threats is a real challenge. I'd have to defer to colleagues at the Department of Defense and things like that. But it is a very serious, issue, and one that is compounded by the fact that we're having a lot of consolidation, in the United States and Canada and a lot of other, frankly, sort of high-income Western-style agricultural economies. And so, how you defend against that is a big challenge. It really is. And I don't know that the United States has figured it out. I wish I could point to five best practices or something like that. But I think it's really ongoing and evolving now. So check back in I don't know, X years, which are years we don't have, unfortunately.
I'm no expert on cybersecurity, but I work with one. Our CTO, Nestor Gomez, is very, very interested in cybersecurity. Of course, we're focusing a lot on food companies, and have to be honest, Nestor would say that we have a dismal level of readiness within the food sector. But he would also say that people are the biggest, weakest, most blatant vulnerability in any, whether it's personal or business environment. And his approach, and my colleague Hubba is sitting here, she can attest that Nestor's approach is training, and awareness. So, it's like stranger danger kind of training, basically. So that's that's a plug for Nestor, and may be helpful and contributes to your question.
And I'm never going to text you and ask you to wire money under the gun, right? Another question there?
Yeah. So how do you see those new technologies affecting and impacting beef producers?
Okay, any comment on beef production there? Go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I missed in when I was talking about how digital tools are being used on farm, I missed talking about livestock altogether, but there is already a pretty large, I guess, influx of use of like sensors, like water level sensors or fence line energizer sensors or tools to monitor feed intake and feed efficiency. Like there's a lot of digital tools being used in the beef sector for sure, which is what the area that I probably know the best. And all the way to using satellite imagery and other digital tools to better manage grazing and intensive grazing. So there is already a lot of early adoption or historical adoption of digital tools in the beef sector already.
One more? I think we have time for one more. Go ahead.
Great, thank you, and great presentations. Really interested I didn't really pick up on the theme around digital connectivity, particularly remote digital connectivity being a limiting factor in the adoption rate of new digital technologies in farming. Especially considering the technologies are advancing so quickly, I'm not sure that the connectivity systems are up to speed to cope with that. Just interested in the panel's views.
Yeah, good question. I'll offer a quick comment and leave some time for others. One thing I'd say is I'm encouraged by some new technologies that are being developed that work in a less than optimal connectivity environment where they, can connect at the farmyard and upload and download and sort of get their mission commands for the activity that'll be run and able to go out and do that disconnected and then come back and sort of upload that data from the cloud. I think that's one sort of midterm solution that's being worked on by some. And the others is I'm encouraged to see, players like Deere make those allegiances with people like Starlink to be able to sort of bring that connectivity literally and put it in place where, we're sort of stalling on a longer term or broader solution. I don't know if others want to make a comment there.
Yep. So we work with a lot of equipment dealers. So I can speak from their perspective because they're trying to get machine data on the cloud so that they can monitor performance of the machine and help with repairs and maintenance and things like that. So they are taking it on themselves to come up with some solution, because if you look at a dealer, there's a store and they manage 20-30 kilometer radius around that store of all farms. So if they can somehow solve the connectivity problem around their cone of radius, and if every dealership store did that, that would be great, because for the dealer, they want that store to be the one-stop shop for everything for the grower.
Anything else there? Otherwise, I want to make sure that I give an opportunity for each of my panelists to make a final comment, and perhaps in that, throwing this at you last minute, just offer perhaps your perspective on something particularly that you're excited about related to what new technologies are unlocking in your space. And maybe I will start at the end there with Joy.
It's incredible, actually, to think about the potential and the opportunities for digital, because I agree, we didn't necessarily address all of the challenges associated with data and digital ag, but there are a ton of opportunities as well that I think we also need to focus on. I'm most excited about I feel like we're getting closer around the data literacy side and the understanding of the value of data, that farmers are going to be better equipped to understand which pieces of data they can most use and manage to make good management decisions.
Awesome. Thank you. I'll move down the line here. Jonathan.
Okay, thanks so much, and thank you all again for having me here today. Just in terms of a piece of the puzzle here that I'm really excited about, I would say autonomy. I think is really interesting, and I do think it's a double-edged sword to the extent that it can sort of displace labor as well as reinstate labor, and there are a lot of historical examples of that. And so economists right now across the world are trying to sort of quantify the benefits and the costs of automation, and so I think it'll be really interesting, really fascinating to see how that impacts all aspects of agriculture in the next 5, 10, 20 years.
I have two things. One, I've met someone from USDA, so I can go back and look at the reports when they say this many farms have adopted technology. I want to know where those farms are. So Jonathan, thank you for being here. Secondly, we're looking forward to being a problem-led company. I think we've iterated on our solution quite a bit, and I think if you don't communicate clearly the problem you're solving, and as Joy said, these problems are very different if you're a farm in Alberta or Saskatchewan or a farm in Brazil that's dealing with rainfall and erosion. So yeah, own the problem, and then people automatically will believe that you have the solution.
Yeah, thank you very much for including me on this panel. I've learned a lot, and I think that's what I'm grateful for, is that we have increasingly more opportunities to bring people together. And I would say that, programs like Canadian Food Innovation Network and CANE are really essential to bringing together communities of people who have shared problems, shared needs, and to really get those insights into systems and into dialogues and to really get us all sort of pointed in the right direction. So we're sharing information, we're forming collaborations, and yeah, this is I think a really big step for Canada that the Strategic Innovation Fund took in 2020 and 2021, and I think it's probably in some ways some of that work by CANE and what we've done sort of underpins some of the things that we talked about today.
Awesome, thank you. Well, I'd certainly agree with those comments and echo them, that those investments in CANE and CFIN that have facilitated the Pan-Canadian Smart Farm Network are important pieces of our collective ability to meet some of those needs, to produce more with less, the thing we talked about at the beginning, to do so in an increasingly sustainable way, and that technologies and new data products are some of the tools that we'll be able to use to make that happen. So thank you very much to my panelists for joining me this morning, and to each of you for your interest in being a part of our conversation. We appreciate it, and class dismissed. Thank you.